The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was a shocking event to the American public. It was a sneak attack. It was a surprise attack. And the American people wanted, in large measure, revenge. Revenge for that. And that attitude carried out throughout the war to its conclusion. And this first strike back at the Japanese home islands was like the response to a boxer getting in the first counterpunch. Confidence that we could actually do this and that there was more to come. This week is the 76th anniversary of the Doolittle Tokyo Raid. And the reason that's important to remember is because it was such an inspirational and important moment during the Second World War, and it has remained an inspirational and important moment inspiring airmen ever since. When we think about strategic air power, the ability to reach and strike any target on the earth, we don't normally think of a couple of airplanes bombing Japan in April of 1942. But that really was the beginning of the idea that we can strike anywhere. There's no place beyond American air power. That's where it starts. This was a joint service effort. It really did feature not only equipment and manpower, but ideas and inspiration and talent and skill and heroism from Army and Navy people. It was originally a Navy idea to, hey, maybe we can fly airplanes off carriers and do this. And well, what airmen can do this? We're going to need Army bombers. And who is the best Army pilot? Doolittle was the best Army pilot. He was well known at that time as a tremendously skilled aviator, and turned out to be a pretty good leader as well. And so the Army and the Navy both figured out, how are we going to use this equipment? How are we going to adapt this medium bomber to take off from a carrier? How are we going to make its range long enough? Adjust the payload and the fuel and so on. We got to train these aviators to take off a carrier deck, a pitching carrier deck in the middle of the ocean. Army aviators weren't trained for that. That was a Navy thing. And so getting the ships together and the crews and the Army airmen and the aircraft and all of this coming together was a real joint service exercise and a huge joint service success. During those months, there was a great deal of doubt as to whether the Japanese could be stopped in the Pacific at all. There was a great deal of fear about Japanese invasion of the United States, invasion of California even. People actually really did fear that. And so this raid that showed that we could strike at the Japanese home islands was really, really important. And it led to important Japanese decisions which ultimately tipped the war in the Pacific in our favor. The Japanese decision to bring forces closer to home and to attack at Midway, which was a disaster for them in the end. All of those doubts that led to those decisions were partly a result of the psychological blow of the Doolittle Tokyo Raid. Not all of the aircraft made it to where they were supposed to go because, again, they had to take off early and they ran out of fuel. One was interned in the Soviet Union. There were 3 crew members killed in action and 1 killed in China. There were 8 prisoners, 3 of whom were executed and 1 died in prison. The other 4 were rescued from Japanese prisons at the end of the war. So 64 Raiders lived through the experience and lived to serve again. 12 more of them were killed in action or killed during the war. 10 of those were killed in action. So the vast majority of the group survived the raid to go on serving, and more of them were killed in combat later. But again, not all those airplanes made it exactly where they were supposed to go. They ran out of fuel and had to ditch. By the time they made it to China, it was dark. And so there were crash landings everywhere, crash landings in the water, 1 landing in the Soviet Union. And so the end of the raid was chaos. Even though the raid itself was a success, the end of it was chaos. And that resulted in those flyers needing a lot of assistance from Chinese civilians. And that was another chapter to the story that cemented at the time our relationship with Chinese people and Chinese forces, because those people sacrificed a lot to help our airmen get to safety. To come here and learn about the raid, what you'll see first in the gallery, what will strike you first is the aircraft. B-25, configured like those on the raid, is laid out in a diorama of the deck of the Hornet with Jimmy Doolittle and the commander of the ship and so on, and you can get a feel for what that environment was like. Now, surrounding all that, of course, is the story of the raid, and you can see the Raiders' goblets. You can see the Congressional Gold Medal that was approved in 2014 for those guys. You can see lots of clothing and equipment and so on that was used on the raid, photographs of all the crews. You can see all of these things and learn the complete story of not just the raid, but the raid's role in the Second World War and the raid's legacy of inspiration today. There are timeless ideas here. There are ideas that transcend the 76 years and will continue on into the future. Themes like teamwork, cooperation, trust, courage, heroism. All of these things work together. The spirit of innovation, a spirit of invention, a kind of can-do attitude. When you're given a task to tackle and you're not quite sure how you're going to do it, but you trust who you're working with and you're able to pull it off to good effect, those are all things that people need to keep in mind today and tomorrow, all about teamwork, cooperation, trust, and in this case, heroism.